Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm very glad that Mr. Sugar chose to end his address to you by telling you that George Burch, his client, was able to come in front of you and fill in all of the gaps, all of the holes in the disjointed, scattered puzzle pieces of confusion that the defense is trying to present to you as some sort of reasonable explanation for why George Burch's DNA is all over Nicole, for why George Burch is the only person that we have evidence of that is at all of the major crime scenes. He filled in the gaps, he plugged in the holes, he prepared a scripted 3-hour direct examination to fill in every gap. And ask yourselves about his demeanor. Assess his credibility. Compare what he did on direct to what he did on cross. And is cross-examination difficult, and is it my role in part to make it difficult? Absolutely. But what else is difficult? Remembering things that didn't happen. Ask yourselves about how scripted and how prepared he looked on that direct examination. They took 2 hours to walk you through an inane recitation of going to McDonald's on the way home from Chicago, to try to build up for you this man of great character who went to church and came from a great community just like yours. A community where you don't tell the police anything or you'll get killed. A community he fled and left behind his wife and his children, this wonderful family man, this terrific dad who absconds probation in Virginia and flees to Wisconsin, away from his kids, away from the wife to whom he's still married. Such a wonderful father. That's fantastic. He filled in the holes with gibberish, with an utter absurdity of a tale. And all of the information about Doug Dietrich, all of it that they want to throw at you, is utterly irrelevant unless you believe his story. Because his story is the only thing that connects Doug to this crime. The only thing. They accuse the state of ignoring Doug Dietrich and saying that we didn't acknowledge that Doug Dietrich was an aspect that we needed to address. We spent 3 days worth of testimony on Doug Dietrich. We called Doug Dietrich. We called his friends. We called the officers who dealt with the initial part of the investigation. The state presented that evidence to you. We didn't hide from it. We didn't ignore it. You heard that he was arrested. You heard that he was investigated. You heard that the evidence excluded him. They want you to look at speculation and conjecture and all of the things that lead to the wrongful convictions that Mr. Sugar mentioned in his closing statement. Look at the story he told you. The story he told you is exactly what the state did in this case. Do we believe that Doug was involved at the beginning of the case? Yes, absolutely. Detective Slinger arrested him. And then he did exactly what Mr. Sugar implored that you do. We continued to investigate every aspect of this case. We didn't find surveillance video, but we found the next best thing. We found George Burch's DNA on Nicole's sock and no reasonable explanation for it to be there. There is no connection between these two people. And then we went on to find 16 different spots on her body where George Burch's DNA is present and Doug Dietrich's DNA is excluded. And absolutely listen to what Kevin Scott told you about DNA and how it's transferred. It's transferred generally with sustained contact. With consistent contact with a particular area, it's more likely to transfer under those circumstances. You saw Nicole's body. You saw those pictures. You know about the injuries. You know how brutal this attack was. She was strangled. She was beaten. There was persistent, consistent contact with her body. And none of Doug's DNA transferred to those areas? That doesn't make any sense. That's not reasonable. That's not logical. It's inconsistent with the truth. George Burch's DNA transferred to those areas because he's the one who had all that contact with her. And how does he explain it? By creating an utter fallacy, a fantasy that he doesn't tell to anyone until he takes this stand after hearing all of the evidence presented to you over the course of 8 days. He needs an explanation. Just like he needed an explanation for why he didn't call. Well, I didn't call because I'm on probation. I was absconding. Or you don't tell people where I'm from. You don't call because you're guilty. And you know you're going to be found guilty. If he really didn't do this, whose DNA would he have suspected would have been on that body? The killer. You'd alert them right away. Let the authorities get out there and find the DNA of the person who did this. Find that murder weapon. Look at that scene. Find all your evidence. He would have come forward right away and allowed police to investigate this and exonerate them. He'd have shown up at their door with the bloody clothes and said, look, take these. The person who killed this woman had to have touched them. And here's where her body is. Go find your evidence. He didn't do any of that. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't tell his father figure, Ed Jackson. He didn't tell his girlfriend, Jordan Schuyler. He didn't tell the other two gentlemen that he lived with. He certainly didn't tell the police. Not even an anonymous call. Not even an anonymous tip. Go find this body. She might even be alive. Mr. Sugar talked to you about this tragic event that he went through. That it was a tragedy. It was a traumatic event. If you believe Mr. Burch's story, he was assaulted, hit in the head so hard that he was knocked out for God knows how long. Despite being knocked out, he has a specific, particular, step-by-step, blow-by-blow explanation of everything that he did. Why? Because it's crafted to explain the evidence in the case. Not because he remembers it. Think about how disorienting that would be. Struck in the head to the point where you are knocked out cold. But then he immediately woke up and he's very apparent. He knows his surroundings, right? I know where Doug is. I know exactly how many feet he is behind me. You see him in the rearview mirror with the dome light that came on that didn't work on cross-examination. Of course, the dome light works on direct, but it doesn't work on cross because it was inconsistent, right? Just like when the defense presents their case, the lighting is perfect. It's wonderful. Doug can see outside and immediately is going to make out that that's his girlfriend in the car with George. But then when we asked Mr. Burch about why he didn't see Doug, oh, it's a dark area. It's a dark area over there. You can't see very well. Right? So George couldn't see Doug from 15 feet away, but Doug's off to the right 120 feet away inside his house, not even able to access the windows, but he's going to be able to see that George Burch is in the car having sex with Nikki. How's he even going to tell that's Nikki? And I love their presentation of Doug. Like, figure out, what's your argument? Is he the drunk, stupid guy at the bar? Or is he a cold, calculating killer? He isn't both. He can't be both. They're giving you pieces to a puzzle, like they said in their opening. The problem is they aren't the same puzzle. They're giving you pieces to 10 different irrelevant puzzles and asking you to throw them together and find a reasonable doubt. That's not what happened here. Doug was drunk that night. There's no question about it. You had testimony from everybody who was with him at the bar. Doug had been drinking. Doug had been doing a lot of shots. The guy that the defense dragged in to give you testimony, Max, he told you, I thought I was going to get left at the bar with drunk Doug because he's sitting at the bar having another drink. If Doug didn't seem to care about Nikki that night and seemed to find her, then why is he suddenly so pissed off, as the defense said in their opening statement, when he finds her? If he was guilty of anything, it was guilty of not caring enough. When did he flip this switch into this violent, rageful, jealous boyfriend that they presented to you in opening? Go back to that opening. That opening isn't evidence. That opening is their map, their roadmap. Ask yourselves, check the box. What from that roadmap that they gave you did they actually demonstrate? Where did they show Doug being angry? Where did they show a fight at the watering hole? Who told you about a fight at the watering hole? No one. Everyone told you that they got along fine at the watering hole. And Doug never even saw Nikki after the watering hole. They were never together. The only person who ever suggests that the two of them were together after the watering hole is that guy right there. The guy with the single most incentive to lie to you about what happened in this case. The only guy who had criminal convictions on the record, as you consider for his credibility. That's the only guy who says that they're ever together after the watering hole. And yeah, you saw Nikki's text messages. They were upset. She was upset at Doug. You also saw Doug's responses. LOL, Nikki, knock it off. Call me, please. Right? And that's after Nikki sends a slew of text messages. And Doug sends a few in response. And they're calm. Dallas Kennedy, who it's pretty clear everyone saw Dallas, she didn't want to be here, she didn't want to be testifying in court on this case. She said that Doug looked like he was trying to calm Nikki down. He was calm that night. He was drunk. If anything, he wasn't very attentive, that's for sure. When did he flip into this jealous, rageful, horrible individual? When did he turn into a calculated killer who took great lengths to cover up his crime? Cover up his crime? He left a flippin' murder weapon outside in front of his house for 2 days. Are you kidding me? There's no way that Doug was a calculated killer covering up his crime. All this stuff with the car, that's a red herring. That's way off in left field. You got the information from Progressive. That car didn't move. You had testimony from Don Chick, who's going to say, oh, I saw this car in the driveway with a blonde woman. Okay, maybe it was Friday, Don, when Nikki was out in her own car. Nikki's a blonde woman. It was noon. She went to get gas. She went out and did rummage sailing. Dallas told you that. Maybe his day was wrong. We know that car didn't move. And even if it moved, so what? It moved to do what? To cover up this crime? He would cover up the crime, but leave the murder scene and leave the murder weapon in front of his house for 2 days? Police didn't find it until May 23rd. That's not a cold, calculated killer. It makes no sense. It's utterly irrational. It's unreasonable. And they want you to believe that Doug would have hid this body in Hoffman Road because it's an area that he knows well. That the only way that someone would end up there is if they know where that field is. You're all citizens of Brown County. You saw the maps. Ask yourself about that location. You turn right out of the subdivision. You don't take the first left because that's the area it just came from, and you know that there's a school there and businesses there and it's well lit. You go to the next left. What do you see? What do you see all your way down GV? You see open field on the left. Open field. What am I going to do? I got to get rid of this body. I'm going to turn left the first chance I get. Where's the first chance you can turn left? Hoffman Road. And you're speeding. You're going faster, right? Okay, that's a 6-minute drive. Assuming the speed limit, he's got a dead body in his car. He's probably going a little faster than the speed limit. I need to find a place to get rid of this body. I turn left. And I go up Hoffman Road. And what do I see? Sheriff's office on the right. Better not stop there. Hotel on the left. I keep going straight. What do I wait until? First clearing where I see some trees, and then there's no houses on the right. That's where we are on Hoffman Road. That's where he turned in. That's where he dumped the body. And ask yourself about that location data. He's the one who's there. He's the one who's 9 feet away from that dump site. 9 feet away where he admits he's the one who brutally brought Nikki to her end and says he threw her over and took off running, right? Took off running and went so darn fast that he traveled 82 feet in 15 seconds. After he's the one who testified that he turned the damn car around already. So the car was turned around and headed out, and he's in such a rush to get away from Doug that he goes 82 feet in 15 seconds? What's he really doing? Probably plugging in the GPS on the way home. How do I get out of here? Just dump this body. I gotta get home. Doug Dietrich wouldn't bring a body to the middle of town, half a mile from the family restaurant where he goes with his family to have dinner, in the middle of a subdivision half a mile up the way. Doug Dietrich, this calculated killer that they want to tell you about, who so carefully cleans up the next day, but he didn't just take a left out of the subdivision and go off into rural Rockland. And Doug Dietrich, this calculated killer, this angry, vicious boyfriend, kills Nikki, and she's laying there dead. And according to his story, Doug's just patiently waiting for George to wake up. Hey man, can you help me move this body? How ridiculous is that? If Doug is this angry, rageful, jealous boyfriend, he doesn't even hit him. George is out cold on the ground and you saw what was done to Nicole. That's brutal. So if you believe that Doug did that to Nicole, he left George Burch utterly unharmed? It's absurd. He would have been just as pissed as the guy who's having sex with his girlfriend. He'd have gone right after George too. He sure as hell wouldn't have enlisted a complete stranger to help him move a body and then let him get away. It's nonsense. It is fiction. It's not even fiction. It's fiction makes sense. You would reject this as fiction. And there's holes. You want to hear about holes in a story? There's a hole in Mr. Burch's story. How did those clothes get so darn bloody on the outside? Where did that blood come from? Every item of clothing is blood soaked. That's how Nicole's pants were found on the roadside. They're inside out. There is blood in the crotch area of those underwear. What is that from? That's from his forcible sexual assault. He admits he's the one who penetrated her. And she has all these internal injuries. Blood in her vaginal wall. Blood on the inside of her underwear. Her pants are inside out. If her pants are inside out, how did the outside of those pants get all that blood, all that hair, all that dirt, if they're off in his consensual fantasy encounter that he had in the back of that car? Because that's what he told you. Her pants were off, her legs were up, we were having a great time. No, that's disgusting. It's harmful to her reputation, it's offensive, and it's untrue. That's not what happened. What happened is he forced himself on her, and she struggled. And it hurt, and it caused her to bleed, and that blood from the inside of her underwear is a result of those injuries that he inflicted. And then when he killed her, and he dragged her along the street, and he dragged her through the field, she got blood and dirt and hair on the outside of her pants, and they're filthy. Because they were on her when she was assaulted. Just like her shirt was. Just like her tank top was. It's not this sexual fantasy that this man has. She struggled, she resisted, he punished her for it. And the evidence tells you that. We absolutely bear the burden in this case. We bear the burden of proving this case to you beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt. What is a reasonable doubt? It's based on reason and common sense, arising from a fair and rational consideration of the evidence, or lack of evidence. It is a doubt that would cause a person of ordinary prudence, which is you. You are an ordinary, reasonable person. It's not based on guesswork or speculation. It's not based on the fear that you'll get it wrong that Mr. Sugar wanted to tell you about. Maybe you'd wrongfully convict someone. It's not based on fear or speculation. It's based on evidence. You are not to search for doubt. You are to search for the truth. The only reasonable explanation, the only truth in this case, is that George Burch killed Nicole Vandermeer. He is at all four of the crime scenes in this case. He picked her up and brought her home from the bar. He brought her in front of the home on Berkeley where she was killed. He brought her to her final resting place in the field on Hoffman Road, and he dumped her clothes on 172. Half of that, three-quarters of it, he admits to. As long as we're talking about standard detective techniques, standard interview practice, that if a person admits to all key events except the one thing that implicates them, that's what they're hiding. They're only hiding the truth as to what happened. He admits to everything else. He admits to picking her up at the bar. He admits to wanting to have sex with her. He admits to bringing her home to Berkeley Road where they did have sex. He admits to penetrating her. He admits essentially that he caused those injuries, although he'll say it's the result of consensual activity. He admits to hauling and dumping her body and dumping her clothes. The only thing he's not going to admit to is whatever happened when he was knocked out cold. 6'7", 260-pound George Burch, knocked out cold by something that didn't even create a mark in his head, right? Well, it was sore, but it wasn't a mark. Why wasn't it a mark? because the people would have seen it. He has an explanation for everything. Okay? Well, not everything. Not a reasonable explanation. He has an explanation. Don't let him use that excuse to get out of what he did. Follow the path. Follow the evidence that's been presented to you in this case. That path leads to one place: his home, his guilt. That is the man that killed Nicole van der Heijden. The man that met this woman in a bar and admitted by his own account to dumping her body in that field, looks like this the next day. Who does that? Who looks like this the next day? Somebody capable of doing this. This is a planned trip, so hey, I know, sure, my version is I was assaulted in the back of the head and made to do this horrible, traumatic thing, which Mr. Sugar told you, this was the most traumatic day of his life. Sure looks like it. This is him the next day, not calling the police, not telling anybody about it. That's him the next day. There is no way his story is true, and you know it. Follow the evidence. It will lead you down the path of truth. The evidence leads you to the path of truth, and so does his story. It leads you to the very same place, his guilt. And that's why we're asking that you return a verdict of guilty for first-degree intentional homicide for George Burch. Bring justice to Nikki and her family.